Beware of Greeks is the 16th episode of the 5th season of Frasier. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a good episode. I definitely enjoyed it. It's never going to be an all-time favourite just because I don't necessarily find it to be the funniest, but it's still pretty decent with some really great cast. It starts off down at KCL. Ross is trying on a hat. I thought she looked pretty good. And then Frasier's cousin Nikos visits, and Nikos is played by Joseph Will, and we find out that Frasier isn't going to his wedding. And we quickly learn that Frasier wasn't even aware he was getting married, and he immediately realises that this is because his aunt Zora, obviously Nikos's mother, decided she wasn't going to invite Frasier because of, well, once upon a time, Frasier gave some bad advice to Nikos, at least advice that she considers to be bad. And we learn pretty quickly that this is because Nikos was going to go to medical school, and Frasier encouraged him to follow his passion and become a juggler instead. And while I would say anybody should be able to follow their dreams, I can understand why Nikos' mother would be a little bit annoyed by that, because one career is at least going to usually give him financial security, the other one not so much. But to hold a grudge for this long definitely seems like a bit of an issue. And Frasier obviously tells everybody about this when he goes back to the apartment, and Martin's really upset about this, but he's also refusing to go. Because if Zora won't invite him, then he's not going to go, even though Nikos has, of course, now invited everybody. And Frasier realises he wants to rectify this wrong. And he goes down to see her in her kitchen. She has a restaurant, and she's played by Patti LuPone. And honestly, the performance is brilliant. Really solid performance, but the character is not exactly the most likeable. So it's a kind of interesting experience. And she's basically chopping up meat with a meat cleaver, and it's a very busy environment, and it just makes me so thankful I don't work in kitchens, because they seem like really high stress environments, and with Frasier there trying to straighten things out, it's even more stressful. But actually it goes his way, because he promises to never give Nikos any advice ever again, and he'll promote her restaurant. And all of a sudden, she's welcoming Frasier with open arms, and we cut immediately to the rehearsal dinner. Frasier and Niles are there. Niles basically spends the episode avoiding cousin Yvonne. And cousin Yvonne is played by Harmon, and she is all over Niles. It's very awkward. I wish we got a bit more out of Niles here, but there is one moment that I loved, and it's when he's hiding behind a wine rack, and Frasier picks up one of the bottles, and Niles' head is just perfectly positioned right in the middle there, and I rather enjoyed that a lot. And of course, we get to meet Nikos' fiancée. She's called Mary Ann. She's played by Valerie Dillman, and Nikos is talking to Frasier about his fiancée, and he accidentally calls her Crystal, and immediately you can see Frasier wondering what that meant. He has his psychiatry hat on, and he can't help himself. He ends up finding out more, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Meanwhile, Martin is looking for his brother, Walt, and he's played by John Mahon, and not only are their names very, very similar, John Mahon, John Mahoney, literally only 2 letters of difference, actually. But they don't look similar in the sense that if you showed me a picture of John Mahon, I would go, oh, he looks like John Mahoney. But in terms of casting them as brothers, I think they did a really fantastic job there. So I'm rather amused by the similarity of their names, and also the fact that they do kind of not really look alike, but definitely pass as brothers, and they're quite similar in their mannerisms. And I liked Walt. I liked Walt as a character. And then, of course, we see Frasier probing a little bit more, and he finds out that Crystal was Nikos's, I guess, real love. She is a fellow juggler, and she went away, and by the time she came back, Nikos was engaged to Mary Ann, and that's the end of that. Of course, it isn't the end of that, because Frasier has to meddle some more, and the next thing we know, Mary Ann turns up. She's clearly been working, because she's very much dressed in an outfit that would be appropriate for street theatre. And Nikos realises, of course, that he's meant to be with Mary Ann, and that's the end of that this time. And needless to say, people are not happy with Frasier. It's a very lively, very busy episode, particularly the rehearsal dinner scene. The scenes there are so busy. There are so many people, and makes me feel a little bit anxious, to be honest. But it looks brilliant, and I think the episode is quite funny. As I said, it's not tremendously funny for me, so it's never going to be one of my favourites, but I did enjoy it. Personal highlights. Also, Daphne was at the rehearsal dinner as well. I didn't mention that. Like Niles, she didn't have a tremendous amount of time in this episode. Personal highlights would have to be, I guess, when Aunt Zara welcomed Frasier with open arms. That moment I thought was very well done. Zora, as I said, she's not a likable character, but the performance was brilliant. And I just also loved when we first saw Walt, when we saw Uncle Walt Crane. I liked that a lot because just very, very, very happy with the casting there. So it's not a bad episode. I certainly don't mind it. In fact, it's pretty enjoyable. But that being said, I think it's fair to say that Beware of Greeks is not my favourite episode of Frasier, but also I can't fault it. At the end of the day, it is pretty decent.